Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back. Today I want to show you how I make those tiny painted air dry clay boxes without using special clay shaping tools. So if you are doing it on a budget just like me, or are at the beginning of ceramics and don't know yet if it's the thing for you and you don't want to directly commit to it with buying all of these special tools or something, so this is very easy and uncomplicated, a little bit improvisational, but it works somehow. So I hope this is going to be inspirational or at best helpful. So I would say let's get right into it and make some clay boxes. First of all, we need a surface. I use baking paper cuts. It's the lazy way kind of, but you can also do it directly on the tabletop or use another base, but you will have to clean it afterwards, of course. The disadvantage of the baking paper though is that it can leave marks in the clay depending on wrinkles in the paper. We will sand the dried box later and the marks will be reduced, but if you really want to avoid the risk, it would be easiest to just work directly on the tabletop. But I personally don't really mind if my box comes out a little wonky and imperfect. Secondly, I always keep 1 or 2 brushes around because we will use the brushes to smooth the surface of the clay with water, or to connect separate components of the box with each other using an extra mixture of clay and water, which I will show you in a bit. This is actually a tool used for bookbinding, which I have misappropriated for working with clay. I use it mainly to shape or to connect individual parts, so for that you can see what you have on hand and want to use. For example, I also sometimes use the back of my brush, but just try what works best for you. Next thing is a ruler. Optimal length would be up to 30 centimeters for the size of our box. Yes, you do see right, for cutting the clay I use a butter knife and sometimes I will use it for shaping too. Then you will need a rolling pin to roll out the clay, but this is my first time ever using a proper rolling pin for working with clay. Beforehand I always used an empty True Fruits smoothie bottle for rolling out my clay. So this will also work. Next real luxury I treated myself with is a round-shaped cookie cutter. This will also be my first time using that for creating my air dry clay boxes. Beforehand I always used a glass which I turned upside down and cut around it with my butter knife to get that round shape for the bottom of the box and the lid. I will demonstrate it to you here with a coaster I just had at hand. You would press it in the clay and then cut around it with a knife. This will also be working. But because I wanted to make a bunch of those boxes for my shop I am aiming to open up at the beginning of next year, I figured that at least a cookie cutter would be a smart investment. Here we have a mixture of water and clay leftovers, which I mentioned earlier in the video. You can use it perfectly to combine 2 components of your box. You can also just use water, but let me tell you, this is really working well. You just put a little bit of water and a little bit of clay together in an empty glass and let it sit for a while, and then you will be able to mix it because the clay will liquefy, and then you can see if you have to put more water or more clay into it, and it will also last you a very long time. You can always throw your clay leftovers in there, and even after months you can revive it with more water. Then of course you need air dry clay. This is the first time I'm using this brand, so I can't say anything about it. I just didn't get the clay I used before, but I think it might work just as well. And of course you will need water. If you are also wearing any rings, then I would advise you to take them off because we don't want clay in the details of our jewelry. The sensation of naked hands is actually very, very strange to me because I barely ever take my jewelry off. I wear it 24/7. Yeah, so this is weird, but better when you're working with clay. So first step is taking a chunk out of your air dry clay and then kneading the clay because you want it to be soft and easy to work with. When the clay is soft enough, and you will notice when it's soft enough, we can start rolling out the clay. The more even the better. However, I don't find that easy either, and eventually my boxes always get a little uneven and wonky. But I don't mind. You will definitely notice for yourself what thickness you prefer to work with. In any case, it shouldn't be too thin and not too thick, because it will be very difficult to work with it in both extremes. Next, I will cut out the body of the box, so to speak. To figure out how long it should be, you will need to know the circumference of the round shape you will use to cut out the bottom and the top of your box. To do this, you can use a string, for example, place it around the jar or cookie cutter, and then measure the length of the string. Or you can, of course, also use the mathematical formula to calculate the circumference of a circle. You can do it as you prefer. I always leave the body or wall of the box a little longer than necessary at first, because you can always cut a piece off if it's still too long. If it turns out too short, you will probably have to do it all over again. If you have the body of your box, it's time to roll out your clay again and then cut out the circular shapes for the bottom and the lid of your box. No matter how you choose to cut it out, whether it's a cookie cutter or a glass turned upside down. After that, you can prepare the handle of the lid. You can really get creative when deciding what shape it should have. I like to use a simple rectangular shape that either lies on its side at the end, so to speak, or figuratively stands on its feet. But you could also use a round shape, or if you want to go one level further, shape something really special like, I don't know, a fruit or a cute animal head. Now we can begin to connect the individual components of the box. The goal is that they hold together as well and as stably as possible. First of all, it is helpful to scratch the parts that will be connected later. Here I first cut off the excess part of the clay. I find connecting the two ends of this part is the most difficult for me personally, but it is helpful to bevel both ends a little bit so that they fit perfectly into each other. After that, these are also carved. In addition, the parts that are to be connected are painted with the mixture of water and clay. As I said, it is also possible to do this only with water, but I personally find it much more difficult. And another general thing, if you want the edges of your lid and the body really smooth, you can smooth the edges out with a little water and your fingers if necessary. To actually connect the parts, I use the tool that has proven useful for this, but there you can be creative and try out what works for you. In a movement from below to above, we now start to connect the body of the box to the base. You have to be careful when doing this and not apply too much pressure or you will deform the box. To counteract this, you can slightly stabilize the spot you are working on from the inside, or use your shaping tool on the inside to counterbalance from there. If the clay is a little too dry, you can also soak your tool in water to slightly soften the clay. However, make sure that it does not get too wet, otherwise it will become unstable too. To make the box even more stable, we can roll a small amount of clay between our hands into a very thin string. Then we lay it out around on the inside of the bottom, and if you like, you can also use this to connect the two ends of our box's body. To blend it out as best as possible, we now use again our shaping tool and maybe some water or our water clay mixture with the brush too. As I already mentioned in the beginning, my boxes always have pretty many marks and are quite uneven, so I paint them again with my clay water mixture to even that a little bit out. And I also want to emphasize at this point that this whole tutorial is just the way I do it, how I figured out what is working for me, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt and really need to try what is working for yourself. This is just me sharing how I like to do things, and I also don't mind if my boxes are imperfect or wonky, and I would even say that I like that better because from my point of view I think they get a little bit more of character that way, but it's all a question of taste, and yeah, you can take away from this tutorial whatever you want. Now we can move on to the lid of the box. The last component that we haven't shaped and cut out yet is the inner rim of the box. This rim will later hold the lid on the box so that it doesn't simply slip off. How long this rim should be depends on how big your box is and therefore your lid will be. You should also make sure that you don't attach this part too far to the outer edge of the lid. Depending on how thick the body of your box is, the lid will not fit on the box. This happened to me once and it's very annoying when you only notice it after the box has already dried through. However, I must confess that I'm always a little lazy when it comes to measuring things accurately, so I tend to take the risk and do a lot by eyeballing it. But of course you can also measure how thick exactly the body of your box is and finish your lid accordingly. But you would have to make sure that the body of your box is evenly thick for that to work, and that's where it would fail for me already personally. Cut out and attach this component in the same way as the previous parts of the box. That means roll it out, cut it out, carve it and attach it. Again, I use a thin string of rolled clay for the inside for more stabilization. Of course, you could also use this on the outside, but I find the end result usually looks a little messier. But in my experience, it's still usually stable enough without it. Finally, I smooth the surface again with my brush and the mixture of water and clay. Lastly, we attach the handle of our lid in the same way. Now our clay box has to dry completely first. To do this, I put it on a kitchen in baking paper and also regularly check that the lid isn't sinking because the handle is relatively heavy, so the lid can bend inward, and therefore I press the inside up every now and then. After 1 or 2 days, I also turn the box and the lid over so that the undersides can also dry well. You can repeat this until the box is completely dry. Also, while the clay dries, sometimes cracks can appear, and here again the clay and water mixture comes in handy because you can repair the cracks a little bit that way. On to the next step. When the clay is completely dry, we can start sanding our boxes. Since I would like to offer a few clay boxes in my store, I made a few more at once. And for sanding, I use this relatively fine sanding sponge, but you can definitely also use regular sandpaper. I even think it would be easier to sand the inside of the box with regular sandpaper. Also, I would definitely recommend wearing a filtering mask since the box sheds very fine dust when you sand it. That's also why I sand the boxes over my bathtub, because otherwise I would get dust all over the place. So it's best to find a spot that you can easily clean up afterwards. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, sanding can smooth out some imperfections in the clay. And as soon as you are satisfied with the result, you can wipe the box with a clean and wet cloth to remove the dust. However, the cloth shouldn't be too wet or touch the box for too long because air dry clay is reactivated by water. But still, the dust should be removed properly, otherwise it will bother your painting process, but it isn't as complicated as it sounds. The next step is to paint the box however you like, and I always use acrylic paint for this. You can make a preliminary drawing before you paint, or you just paint directly on the clay. When the paint is completely dry, you can apply a protective varnish. I use this matte silk varnish. It's not specifically for clay, but can be used for many different surfaces. And in this case, it works quite well, I would say. However, I've also made the experience that even if the lid and box have been dry for a long time, the lid sometimes still sticks slightly to the box and tears off a little bit of paint from the box. So you might be better off trying a different varnish if you want to be absolutely sure. And these are my final results. I hope this video was helpful and or inspiring to you. Let me know in the comments, and also if you have tried to create your own clay box or just come say hi. But that's it for today, and I'll be signing off now. Consider subscribing to the channel if you liked this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Goodbye.